dancers! Welcome to another tutorial from Northwest Belly Dance. My name is Nefabit. Today we're going to work on Saiidi hip drop, which is a very popular, very traditional movement. At the beginning of the video we are going to work on the basic technique. If you're newer and you want to first learn the basics, stick around for that. If you're an intermediate to advanced dancer and you just want to fine-tune and improve your technique on this movement, I will put a timestamp either in the description box or up on the screen, maybe both, we'll see. But look for that so you can skip ahead, and then let's just get right into it. Okay, so the very basic of this movement, the basic technique, begins with a regular hip drop. And for that we want to start with the feet parallel, nice deep plie. We're going to go, usually it will be at a 3/4 angle to your audience, so I'm not straight into profile and I'm not straight on, I'm halfway between. We're going to keep both legs bent. The right foot in this case, but think of your downstage leg, your audience leg, is going to start on releve, and the back leg is going to be flat. Those feet are not quite at a T position, but close to it. Make sure the foot isn't too far forward or too far out, and the knee is going to point in the same direction as your profile. Okay, so that's very important. We don't want the knee doing funky things. The basic, we're going to start tucked in. We're going to think of lifting this hip up by engaging the oblique, and we're going to drop that hip down. Very important that we release into the opposite leg, and we'll talk more about that later in the fine-tuning section. But we're going to lift up with the oblique, drop into the hip. Lift, drop. The emphasis is going to be on the downbeat, so the counts will be 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. That does not change. The hip becomes like a metronome to the whole movement, alright? We'll drill it slow, in which case we're going to go half time. But once we drill it at full speed, that hip remains consistent the whole time. The second part of the movement is an extension in the leg. Now, we want to make sure that we're not kicking straight out like so, and we'll talk more about that later as well. But we're going to lift up as the preparation on the and count. So it's and, 1, and 2. Extending the leg. It doesn't have to extend far. Video starring my cat Pico. Hi, baby. Come on. She wants to be in the video too. So once we do that, we're going to lift up on the count and 1 and 2. Notice that the leg stays straight and I'm just brushing my foot out and along. Alright? Again, this is just super basics. Get the basics first and we'll go to the fine-tuning section. So the count is going to be, come up in here, and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, 6, 7, 8. Try that on the other side. Transition is just an easy step around, so step, pivot, alright? And 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7, 8. That's your basic Saiidi drop. It takes a little bit of practice. It looks simple, a little easier said than done, so just keep working on that. Keep working on the timing of it. Practice it slow. If you slow it down to half time, the counts on that will be 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Once you get the hang of that, you can increase that tempo to 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Down and point and down and point and down and point. Down, point. So now let's talk a little bit of fine-tuning here. So I'm going to come closer to the camera so you can see my muscles working. I'm also going to face you so that you can see what tends to happen in the knee area and the hip area. So common mistake number 1 that we often see is that the back leg stays straight or does not bend enough. So even if I'm in this position here, my leg isn't locked back, but it's still not in a nice deep plie. It's only bending a little bit. The problem with that is when we lift up This is great. We're seeing from that neutral point, we've lifted the hip bone above that. But when we release that hip, we can only go to neutral. So we have lift, lift, but there's no downward energy. And this movement is very earthy, it's very downward, so we really want to get that deep feeling in that hip where it's actually passing level and going down. So we're increasing our range of movement by lifting the hip above neutral and below neutral. The only way to accomplish that is to plie the back leg. So I'll show you from back here. I really hope my toes are in frame. Can't quite tell. But if the knee is straight up here, I'll show you. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's okay. You're doing it, but it could be better, right? So once we plie both legs, 1, 2, 3, 4. And with the leg, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Much better, right? Because now we have a full up and down range of movement. We're not just stuck here. The other problem with that is not just the technique and the appearance, it's also an alignment and an impact issue. We always say belly dance is low impact, but only if you do it right. What happens to the leg when we start dropping with force into a locked leg or a straightened leg is we're putting impact and stress into the hip joint and into the knee joint because we're slamming back down and there's no cushion. The muscles, when we plie here, they absorb the impact of that movement rather than putting it directly into your hip socket or your knee joint. So that brings me to my second point, which is to discuss the gluteus medius area. This is the absorption and this is the flexion that happens to create that downward movement. Ooh, my hip just popped. I don't know if you heard that little click. If you heard it, that was my hip. But, so we're lifting up in the oblique. Obviously, this is driven from here. So this is a contraction here. And then with the plie on this leg, we can't just plie. Now we have to actually release the movement into this leg. The pelvis is one piece. It has a little bit of movement, but not a lot. So any movement that we create on one side needs to have an equal reaction on the opposite side. So as soon as we start trying to push the hip down, this hip needs to come up. And then the knees need to be, as a general rule, bent enough that when you're working your full range of movement as to what your muscles can accomplish, that when you straighten this leg, it doesn't straighten all the way. It should never come straight and lock back. It's extremely bad for your joints, and it's going to give your movement a herky-jerky, sudden stop kind of effect. We don't want it to be stopping because it has to. We want it to be stopping here. So this, I have equal movement on both sides. I have a deep plie here, which looks a lot better than this. We're only getting half of our potential here. And it's not comfortable on here. This will also impact the back as well. So protect your joints, increase your range of movement, work harder. It's harder. Your legs will burn, your gluteus medius will burn, the standing leg works harder. But remember, when we work harder, it's generally because we're doing it right. The second common problem that I see very often, even with experienced dancers, is when we come into our fourth position here. If I show you from the side, we should have a nice long line in the back. We have the legs propped up like so, but what we'll see sometimes is instead of dropping down like an elevator, we go into this swayed back. Now what that does, on either side there, whether you're here or here, what that does is now your movements are going to be on a diagonal. Just like in a standing first position or second position posture, as soon as that back has a curve to it, now all of your movements are going to happen on this slightly diagonal plane, which you can probably get away with. Not everyone is going to notice that, but someone with a trained eye is definitely going to notice that. And most importantly, your lower lumbar spine is definitely going to notice that because you're putting unnecessary pressure right here. So dancers, when you complain of back pain, it is usually based on your pelvis position. Not always, but very often. So the important things to fix this problem, let me get a little closer here. when you plie and come down into your posture here, you need to lift up through your hip flexors. Just right here. Alright? So right here, look at the line of my fingers. We don't want to have a zigzag right here. You want that to be a little flatter. Alright? And I'm not talking flat as in abs or belly. I'm talking about the line of your spine and the line of your hips. So tailbone is pointing downward. It's not over tucked, so I'm not squeezing here. But I am just lifting right through here and tucking back right through here. Your back does not have to be perfectly ramrod straight, but when it's long and vertical like this, now these movements are on a more vertical plane than they are here. So incorrect, correct, incorrect, correct. Again, your spine and your hips and your knees will thank you for your proper technique. So let's get just a little bit more detail into the muscle groups that are working here. Obviously, because we are in a deep plie, our quads are working, the hip flexors are working just to pull our pelvis into a neutral position and support all of the upper body carriage so that we're not dancing like this, right? And then those are all the supporting muscles. We have our releve here. But now, so the foot that's up, the active working leg, that is the same side where the oblique works to pull that hip up. And then when we release, we have to flex into the gluteus. It's right in between, right wrapping around the side. The glutes are a large muscle span, and where they wrap around here is right where we're going to feel that. You're going to feel it right in here. And lifting up into the obliques and flex, up, flex. And remember, the hips continue as a metronome as we extend the foot. So that brings me to the next point. I'm going to zoom the camera out just a little bit. So I'll show you the effect from the proper angle with all of the elements in place except for an engaged leg. So if we're going, you know, lift, drop, lift, lift, drop, lift, or even worse, flop. Or the ambiguous foot, it can't decide, is it pointed, is it flexed, is it pointed, is it flexed? We don't know. It doesn't know. You don't know. Audience doesn't know. Nobody knows what's happening. The foot is the final extension of where you're hitting that beat. That is bum bum ba ba bum ba ba ba. It is sharp. Alright? Imagine there's a needle coming out of the edge of your toe. And you're going to go stop, stop. Don't just flop your foot out there. Floppy ankles are my worst nightmare. Just don't do that, please. And if you are going to do a more folkloric style where you're not pointing the toes, that needs to be a conscious decision, and there needs to still be energy in the foot. Whether you're deciding to go for a hard flex or just a toe flex, that has to be intentional. When you are doing a performance art, if you are going for something very, very traditional, where it's more like home style, the world's your oyster. But when you're dancing on a stage, it needs to be apparent. What are you doing? Do it correctly, do it fully. Alright? So the last thing I'll think about today for you to give you to work on is with this idea of this long straight line, how do we engage the whole leg? I want you to think of stretching a rubber band in both directions. As you work here, as soon as you come from this position to an extended position, your hip and your foot should be stretching away from one another. So we're going drop, stretch, drop, stretch. Same thing on the other side, drop, stretch, drop, stretch. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this tutorial was helpful for you. I hope you maybe learned a few pointers. Remember that this is specifically for the classical style or the golden era style, whatever you choose to call it, of belly dancing. There are many variations in the world out there of different ways you can do this movement. This is what I find to be the most helpful, the most effective, and the safest in my 25 years of belly dancing. So I think I can say with a fair amount of confidence that it it works pretty well. So give it a try. If you have questions, feel free to leave a comment below. You can also request videos, or you can send me a message as well. Thank you for joining my community. I hope that you'll hit subscribe. And also, if you're on Facebook, look for my Northwest Belly Dance Student Discussion Group. I would love to have you there as well. Thank you very much, and look